Actually, it was a conference talk I gave, and as a result of giving this conference talk a number of times, I do personally dominate the search results for the term swearing and nudity. Well, that's not intimidating at all. That's fine. If I turn around and scream really loudly, I apologize. So I gave this talk for the first time earlier this year at a conference in Gibraltar. Now, the terms or the theme for this conference was out of chaos. And when I first heard the theme, I remember just thinking to myself, well, I know a fair bit about chaos. It's just the getting out of it that I struggle with most of the time. And then I got thinking about the journey that I've been on over the last few years, and the people that I've met, the people I've connected with, the people I've loved. And I realized that maybe I know absolutely nothing about getting out of chaos, but I do know a lot about living in it, and I wasn't sure that I really wanted out. So in March 2017, my life turned well and truly upside down. I did fall well and truly into chaos. I'm sat on my sofa at my home in Manchester, and my partner of 13 years has just told me that she wants to leave me. I knew the relationship had been struggling, but I was blind to the reality. It completely threw me. I swung from the sheer panic of how the hell do I cope with this to the grief of the loss of the relationship. How are we going to deal with the fact that we had 2 children? How is it going to work? It was complete chaos. We'd been together since I was 19, and as we grew up together, we also grew apart. It seemed like everything was collapsing, not just the relationship, but my entire identity. I realized that I'd become a we before I knew who me was. And without that we, who the hell was I? So, trapped in a crisis of identity, I set out to try and recreate myself. I wanted to transform myself to be someone else, anyone else, just not the broken person that I felt I was. Just before we separated, I'd taken a decision. I'd been working in largely technical positions for nearly 17 years at that point, and I wanted to reorient my work, so that means I could work with people first. So I left my technically focused contract, and I started to try and rebrand. And then that happened. So I was unemployed, broke, newly single, abandoned and alone, and I had no idea who I was. So, like a protagonist in my own sci-fi cliche, I did what anyone would do. I accepted a speaking gig in Detroit, obviously. So I was also going to be running a workshop while I was there, but because I wasn't known to anybody, I sold a total of 0 places, and I ended up with 2 days to myself. So I headed out into Detroit and was exploring with my camera. Detroit is an amazing city. I'd never been there before, but it feels like this city that's rising from the ashes. This is a city that has had nearly half a century of poverty and struggle, but it's so full of hope. The people are just unbelievably hopeful. Now, I was having a wonderful time, but my friends and family were worried about me. I was reminded of all of the dangers of walking around a city like Detroit looking like a posh white tourist who had potentially wandered around the wrong street. I had a call from my mother where she just started, "Darling, you know there are guns in America, don't you?" So on the last day, I'd been exploring Detroit and thankfully not met my end just yet. And I realized that in my excitement to leave that morning, I'd forgotten to pick up my bag. So it got to the end of the day and my battery ran out in my camera, and I realized that I'd left my wallet and I didn't have any money for a taxi home, so I had about a 30-minute walk. So I start walking home. And as I turn a corner, I see this man. He's utterly filthy. He's got a cut on his forehead and plastic bags around his feet. He looks right at me, looks down at my camera, and just goes, "Hey man, take a picture of me. I'm the real Detroit." Well, I thought, my mum's words ringing in my head. I guess I had it coming. I stopped and smiled. "I'm so sorry." Not going to let the fear of death get in the way of good British politeness. "My camera's battery's dead, and I'd love to take your photo, but I can't." I paused for a moment. And I'm sorry, I'd left my wallet at home today. I don't have anything else I can give you. He looked at me, and I looked back at him for what felt like hours. And then he said, "Can I rap for you?" Well, that was definitely unexpected. But surprisingly enough, I knew exactly what to say. I can tell you, if you find yourself in that situation, that the correct answer is yes. So in the strangely intimate setting on a corner of a street in downtown Detroit, this man rapped for me. He told me his story. He told me how when you live with a heroin addiction and you have no money, you live with withdrawal all the time. He told me how 2 nights before someone had kicked the shit out of him while he was sleeping. He didn't know who it was, he just woke up with a boot in his face. He told me about his wife. He told me about his daughter. He told me how much he missed her. He told me how much he loved her. And he told me how he left them to protect her from the him he was becoming. When he finished, I hugged him and thanked him. We said goodbye, and I went on my way, walking up Cass Avenue. A moment later, behind me, I heard him talking to someone. "Hey man, did you get anything?" The voice said. Nah, my friend replied. "Told you, man, we're not going to get shit from people around here," the voice said. "Nah, man, he listened to me. It's been a long time since anyone listened to me." This was a deeply humbling experience. When I went to Detroit, I was broken and in pain. But this city, with all of its suffering that it had endured for over 50 years, was a city of community, a city of pride, a city of hope, a city that, despite everything, is holding on to its authenticity, holding on to the real Detroit. What I realized in that moment is that if you don't give people space, they can never surprise you. I'd given him just a little bit of space to be himself, not to be what everyone expected him to be. As leaders, we need to give people the space to surprise us, the space to grow, the space to fuck up, and the space to recover. Our number one priority as leaders should be holding the space for the people to be amazing. So I'm going to get a glass. Early the following year, I was working in India, and I had the pleasure to spend some time with a friend and colleague, Linda Rising. We discussed an experience that she had many years before with a team she was working with in Texas. She was running a workshop for them, and there was this one guy that just wouldn't take part. He wouldn't engage with the session at all. He sat in the corner of the room and would watch, and she would say, "Look, it's okay. You don't have to be here if you don't want to be." And he said, "Oh, no. I just want to see what's going on." This went on all day, and Linda even put on lunch for the group. And He just sat there and ate his own sandwiches on his own. At the end of the day, she did an exercise called showing appreciations. And this is where a group sits in a large circle and they thank each other for the work that they've been doing. So, for example, someone might say, thank you so much to another individual for working late with me last night and helping me fix that database problem. And the person that receives it can either stay silent or they can say thank you. They can't just go, I was just doing my job. They have to receive that appreciation. So the group were doing this activity, and predictably this guy sat in the corner. And then after a little while, Linda notices that he's joined the circle and sat down. And after a little bit longer, he stands up and he addresses the whole group and just says, thank you for putting up with me. This exercise and Linda created space for this person to surprise them, for this person to stop living up to the expectations of the group, to be authentic. People are chaotic, and chaos needs space. If you don't make space for the chaos in your life, you will never let anyone, or even yourself, surprise you. Much of the time, we offer up a performance to the expectations of others. It's not surprising, it's just what they expect. As leaders, this is about rethinking our position completely. Are we managing the people we work with, or even worse, the resources, or the space in which they are working? In fact, as leaders, do we need to manage at all? How much control do you really need? When a new person joins an organization, the management has expectations of that person. They are both based about how that person sold themselves at the interview, but also about the cultural norms of that organization itself. We expect them to just kind of fit in and toe the line. How does your organization react to people who don't align to those cultural norms? These cultural norms are the psychological space in which your employees work. They define the mental boundaries, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I've worked with many leaders that don't realize the implicit boundaries that they are creating. I once worked with an organization in the UK, and they wanted me, as many do, to help increase the autonomy in their teams. They wanted the teams to be more independent and to make decisions on their own more effectively. So I asked this particular manager to give me an example of how much one of these decisions would be worth. How many millions would this make the company, or lose potentially? And predictably, he said, yeah, these are business critical decisions. We want the teams to be able to set the direction. We want, we've read about this agile stuff. We want it to work. And I then asked him if they had a dress code, which sort of threw him. Now, I actually knew they already did. But luckily, he humored me and he said, yeah, there is a dress code, just to keep people professional. So I said, oh, right, okay, that's interesting. So you want the teams to make decisions valued in the millions, but you don't trust them to get dressed in the morning. This is an example of how we create these conflicting boundaries. We create the space for people to work in, but actually often the boundaries are really not as clear as we think they are. We need to make space for the chaotic people. For the chaotic people we work with, we need to make space to let the amazing humans surprise us, to create space for serendipity. So in May this year, I returned to Detroit. And as I walked up Woodward Avenue, I was with a friend then, and Facebook kindly reminded me that I had been there on that day, amazingly, 2 years before. And only this time I'd just delivered that very same workshop, but it had actually sold out. And over the last 2 years, as I reconnected with myself and began to accept the challenges that I've had and moved through my own challenges, I've had more success and, more importantly, made more close friends than I ever had. As we walked up the street, we found the Detroit Museum of Contemporary Art. When I walked up past this building 2 years before, it was covered in amazing murals. It was painted in pink and yellow stripes. But this time, as we saw it in the distance, it was all black. I thought that perhaps maybe they were between murals. They were just going to be decorating it. But as we got closer, we realized there was a mural there. It was a simple message in white neon lights. It just read, "Everything's going to be all right," the lyrics from Bob Marley. Create space for your people. Let them fuck up and let them surprise you. Make space in your life for chaos, because out of chaos comes serendipity. And in a chaotic world full of chaotic people, we can't have success without it. Thank you very much.